Every once in a while.
That's not so bad.
As
Hey, John.
I forgot to bring them last time.
On accountants, but I didn't. Take cat to the vet for $300 bill.
Write down the list.
Yeah, it actually turns out it was pretty severe bite. I got the hair cleaned up, but you got everything out of the house. I'm hoping I don't have the same story.
So that's like.
Is she getting inflammation or? Not yet, it's 3.5 days, 4 days later now.
Right now, I center console.
He was doing okay and about
And it came.
48 hours ago.
And then.
Some infection and then nothing clear abscess and I thought, well, you know, I could exercise myself and I'm thinking,
Get enough software.
I'm not gonna get it clean enough. It's not without. And they on the face on the arm. Well, it doesn't, definitely, there was 3 holes, 30 on the right. So I took him down. That same thing with.
And you can't park it on the.
He was standing around, everything's out real good. Take care of it, not really great.
My friend comes down there, I'm all just.
It's like this. I don't really know going. I can see a bunch of like faces. I'm like, oh, okay. Right. Flying my way back out of this.
Taking it around and just trying to do back here.
I think, they don't expect to get like.
You usually kind of resident.
With that.
But
You're not, never seen the.
there's better, litter box.
Water.
I'm not there. Oh, there. So.
The dogs.
I couldn't know the names of like talk about that.
That's the trouble. And it doesn't seem to bother her. Look at she's like.
It's how you get know about a time.
Sharon.
Yeah. They never.
I think maybe start.
Yeah.
Maybe that's.
Yeah.
Just to make sure it works, I guess.
Two brothers.
That looks pretty good.
Like, sometimes.
This thing, yeah. It's pretty reasonable, eh?
Yep, I think it looks good.
Recording's in progress.
But the point is that different ways to give them.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Or I can, yeah, or I run. I think it was Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. The food. Thanks to Sherry over at the Pizza Basket, same good things, for sure. It's courtesy of National Valley Bank
to put on this ranch roundtable series. It's paid for the food, which is pretty nice. And then our hosts, our gracious hosts, here at the Madison Valley Library. I mean, we can't say enough about this space. It's super godsend for us. The partners that bring this ranch roundtable together every winter, at least the last couple of winters, Madison Valley Ranch Group, Madison Conservation District, MCU Extension, we've got Lena, Audreyville, and the Ruby Valley Conservation District. So it's a nice organization partnership. We do diversity of different subject areas, but all very much so focused on working lands and ranching in this area. This particular night, we're super happy to have the Mannix crew down from Helmville area. We've got Brian, we've got Cole. I'll let them introduce themselves. And then perhaps after they introduce themselves, we could go around the room. And it's maybe on the large side, but I don't think too large, to maybe just offer who you are, your experience specific to rangelands or ranching, and maybe just those two things. That'll be fine. And then we'll come back full circle to Cole and Brian, and they'll roll through a pretty concise PowerPoint, because the focus tonight will be a little bit more on some like engagement, discussion, a little bit back and forth, question, answer, that sort of thing. I didn't offer my name. I'm David Laufenberg. I'm with the Madison Conservation District.
I'm Brian Mannix, work on our family place over in Blackfoot in Helmville.
And I'm Brian's cousin Cole. I live in Helena, the city boy, actually not on the ranch, so I can't claim. But work with the family on other things like our beef program, and then kind of work on working lands, conservation and stuff over the years. So what am I, like, is there 8 years between us, 8 or 9 years or something?
I'm 29.
Okay, I'm the oldest cousin, and there's a couple that are still younger than I, but our folks, my dad, Brian's dad, one other brother, and then their 3 spouses on the ranch. And then there's a whole bunch of the 5th generation back. So thank you all for having us.
I'm John Crumley, and I'm pretty old, so I should know better. Because I've been ranching a long time. But, seems like there's a lot of different things you have to deal with now that we didn't have to deal with before. Ranchland Group has been dealing with them in the valley here for 25 years. So, with wildlife, storms, drought, tourists being bought out by people that have more money than God. So it's interesting.
I'm Ray Gordon. I'm the Big Sky Watershed Board member of the Madison Conservation District. I'm Linda Owens. I'm the project director for Madison Valley Ranchland Group. I have a few cows that wander looking for pasture. And everybody, if you want, there are some handbooks back there, empty notebooks, if you want to take notes and need something to jot them down.
I'm Kay Suzuki. I'm a supervisor on the Madison Conservation District. I was raised on a working cattle ranch in the Bitterroot Valley, and I was 35 years with the Forest Service as a range management specialist. Now retired.
My name's John Osborne. I live up in Virginia City. I own and operate a local construction land management company, but I've worked in stock production and crop production since I was 5th or 6th grade, so I have a keen interest in the subjects.
My name is Nick Dyke. I was born and raised on a
little farm ranch up out of Harrison, the north end of the Madison County here. Serve as a supervisor for the Madison Conservation District. And I case give me a good look and actually board chair.
My name's Scott Holbrook. I'm with, Twin Bridges. My wife and I grow early generation seed potatoes. Full tie, Twin Bridges. From the water spot. Born and raised on the family ranch. We're primarily a cow calf operation. So we raise hay and grain. I'm John Malovich. I'm the executive director over at the Madison River Foundation. Son of a dairy farmer from upstate New York who turned, I guess, black sheep of the family, literally raised several medium sheep and lambs. But here, with a passion for Madison Valley and, of course, the river.
I'm Rita Owens. I was born and raised in the part of the state, part of right on the reservation here. So I'm married with my husband, Brad, over here. We now run the Mains Ranch, which is. I guess I'm the zookeeper because I've got the chickens, the goats, the sheep, all the things that are not. And I also sell fertilizers, so I go to a lot of different people's ranches and farms. And to me, it's very interesting to see how different people handle their businesses. And, you know, just their perspective on the ground, animals, all of it. And it's very eye-opening, all the perspectives that people have on how to make operating ranch. So it's very interested to hear you guys talk, and I apologize, but I have to leave early, so I parked myself by the door.
Kevin Suzuki, I'm on the board of Rabbit Family Ranch Group, and chair of the weed committee. 40 some odd years, the entire 40 some odd years for service.
I already introduced myself, but I didn't offer my experience with rangelands. I come from a long line of dairy farmers in Wisconsin, but as long as they come. Yeah. But these days, I'm being reintroduced to working landscapes after mostly thinking about wildlands through a sort of ivory tower academic perspective in undergrad and graduate school. And it's been super refreshing to return to the valleys and more productive, diverse country and think about how we produce food off the landscape. And really think about how it's all applied ecology. It's all applied ecology. It's a beautiful thing. We had 5 chickens up in Virginia City. Too bad system. We'll try and expand this year. It's up in the stage, you know.
I'm Michael Walsh. I grew up in Twin Bridges and Daily Ranch over there. I moved back here about a year and a half ago for Opportunity Bank. I shared my April, so I'm trying to get to see both sides of it. At home, and speaking of kind of operations as well.
Jim Telsworth from Bridges. We have a yearly operation and we also custom background with calves and fall. Go back to grass yearly would be mostly irrigated if we have so much service. And kind of sweating that part of it. Yeah. Brett Owens, I work for Rita on the ranch there. We run a cow calf operation. I lease my dad's place. Came back, was in the Air Force 20 years, and came back and started running it. It's been a big change for me, but one of the things that particularly as well. And I kind of hate to mention it, but I'm also the chairman of the FSA board. FSA board.
Kalina Miller, Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension in Jefferson County's office is based in Whitehall. My name's Audra Bell. I'm the stewardship director for the Ruby Valley Conservation District. I do not have a ranch lands background whatsoever, but I've worked some more things and take back support for our local ranchers in the Ruby Valley.
And I'm Ben Masters. I'm the Big Sky Watershed board member serving with the Ruby Valley Conservation District this year.
Nice to meet everybody. You want to open her up?
Sure. So yeah, I'm Brian, fifth generation back on the ranch. And gonna try to give you guys kind of an overview of some of the things that we're trying to do. And it's not all going well. Like we have some shit going on. So I just think it's important to say that. Yeah. It's really easy to come to these things and be like, oh, wow, that guy's doing all this, or, you know, what am I doing wrong? Well, half the time, we're not telling you about all the shit that's going wrong. So we got plenty of shit going on, just so you know. But yeah, our ranch was established in 1882. My grandmother's still on the place. It's currently owned and managed by the three brothers, which is his dad, my dad, and their third brother and their wives, all equal shareholders. I think there's 5 of us of the 5th generation back, and then like my wife's part-time, his sister's part-time, and then we have some other employees that are either 3/4 time or part-time employees as well. So plenty of us rugrats running around. It'd be a management nightmare sometimes for his dad. Yeah, you want me to start with the grazing side of things?
Well, I guess I would say a little bit about, like we're a cow-calf operation.
Yeah.
We also run some stockers. Most of what we sell is commodity, calves. We have a small local beef program. And I guess this year we would have sold about 300 animals locally, either to a couple of grocery stores and restaurants or to individuals. About 350 individual customers who buy from us that started running a route up to Bozeman one Saturday, and the other Saturday down the kind of Missoula Flathead. It's a little bit of context maybe, that the valley has experienced a lot of changes. You know, probably in the last, I think it was 2002 when the first grizzly bear kind of depredation happened on the Two Creek Ranch up against kind of the north end of the valley, which is the Bob Marshall. And since then, the bear presence and the wolf presence has really increased. So predator everything has changed a lot. I mean, the commodity price, input prices continue to rise, and commodity prices don't keep up in terms of what we tend to sell. And so lots of different challenges of how do you continue to make a living and also at the same time increase the number of kids on the ranch. So maybe those are just a few things. We also have a little temporary premise, a little bit of context for the operation.
Yeah, running yearlings, just changed calving seasons. This was the first year that we retained all of our own calves. Bought some last year, so tries to give us flexibility in the markets, also flexibility with stocking rate as far as dealing with drought and all of that. But quick ranch overview of managing close to about 50,000 acres, and that's split like roughly a third of public leases, third private leases, and a third owned. About 1,250 pairs. Like I said, stock enterprise is growing. Direct marketing, timber, hay. We don't really sell hay, but sorted out in the books as enterprise. And then have sold a few genetic replacement heifers the last few years and possibly more of a market there to tap into as well. So try to diversify that. We also have about a band of sheep that runs on our place during the summer that we utilize them for weed management. That could be possibilities going down the road of having one sheep one day, but this is kind of what it looks like. And we have some pretty steep country, rough Forest Service country, and some private landowners way up there too. Most of our irrigated comes out of a reservoir, so water rights pretty fortunate that way. There's once you get another on the river and have to deal with a lot of those calls. So that's a big benefit to our irrigated ground because it fills up almost every year.
I might point out just a little bit of context for all this.
Yeah.
That is the North Fork of the Blackfoot River and the Scapegoat Wilderness, Bob Marshall Wilderness to the north end of the valley here. This way is Missoula, this way is Drummond. This is, I think, 9,000 acres subdivision up in the remote mountains.
Like 240 landowners up there.
So we run cows in the summer there on a lease, which is a big kind of people management challenge. This is kind of where the home ranch is in these bottom irrigated meadows. And then it's just been, this is a little island property that came from my grandma's side, and so you can see it's kind of this long angular ranch. It's not super contiguous, and they're kind of bringing cattle all over the place, different times of year. Kind of brings its own challenges.
Mix of trailing and hauling stuff around, which a lot of guys here are familiar with associations. We don't have any cattle associations, but trailing cows places, hauling them home, that type of stuff. Yeah. So some of the things we're trying to do to reduce input costs, and one of them is winter grazing. Before I moved home, the brothers were pushing the lines pretty hard. They had Jim Garish out. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with him. He was on the ranch, and we had some swampy ground, a lot of sedges that you can't really graze until it freezes for a couple of reasons. One, there's bottomless, no sod to it. Two, the sedges, they won't eat it until you get snow and colder weather. They found a line that killed a few cows, so we really started paying attention to body condition score, how far you can go with them. So stockpiled forage is one form of that. We started bale grazing 5 years ago, using that as a tool, not necessarily everywhere. And last 3 years have been doing some swath grazing, and that's been going pretty well. It's still in experimental phase, hoping to scale that a little bit more. So like quick on the swath grazing, on the back end, I ran some numbers this year to try to put a value on it. It was roughly 60 acres that we did in this one spot. And if you would have baled that, you would have got about 40 days worth of feed I had replacement heifers and beef on it. So you'd had about 40 days of feed. Now I had them in there for 36 days. So missed out on about 4 days of feed to feed that hay out. So this isn't including the front end of costs and things, just the back end. Cost me about $110 to feed it out through with the tractor and spinner. And I was able to do it with polywire and four-wheeler and just walking for $8 a day. So you can scale that, it could add up. And the challenge in our area is it doesn't blow off. So cows can graze through pretty good snow. I'm sure you guys know that, but we'll get a warm thaw, wind, and pretty soon you get a nice shelf like this. And that's really, really tough grazing conditions on stockpile forage. And I was watching cows graze through 3-foot drifts on this. And at one point, it was sometime in February last year, I was able to walk across the snow. And the only spot I'd fall through is where those windows were. I think it creates a little bit of its own heat, and you do lose some on the bottom end where it freezes to the ground. But I was able to extend grazing. Last year I grazed 250 head till March 17th using this. That's pretty good, especially for our country. So they're able to graze through that, and that crust layer, they'll break it with their feet, and then they have this whole windrow, and they'll just start flipping that crust layer right off the top. And it tested about the same, slightly less than bales that were put up in that field. So that hay tested like 7% protein in a windrow, and like the hay was 7.5%. They're not losing much. They're losing a little bit on the bottom. So the freezing, they don't quite clean it all up. On the left there, that's front end. And then on the right, obviously, January or February-ish when we were grazing. It's been a lot of fun. It's really cool. Been a great tool for us that I hope we can scale. And yes, we have elk. No, we haven't had a problem with them yet. We also have a shoulder season in our area that allows us to apply pressure, and the way that we're managing that is to apply pressure, heavy pressure in the bottom grounds and leave our shoulder country alone. So we have a lot of winter range. So like right now there's 300 elk wintering on their winter range. And the last 3 years, we have not utilized any late season hunters. And the first year we killed more elk for sure. After that, it was more we changed habits. So we directed so much pressure towards our bottom productive ground and left those hillsides alone early and late season. So we started to change habits. So that's an advantage that we have. And yes, I'm concerned going forward if that tool goes away, if we'll be able to continue to utilize this. But until that happens, I would like to try to scale this because it economically it's pretty good. And could be a big deal for us.
How many years?
The swap grazing, 3. So I've been the one managing on the ground. It was David's brainchild. He got it from a guy in Colorado that's been utilizing it. So yeah, we changed our calving season last year. So our main herd is calving due date of April 20th, and our 2-year-olds due date of May 20th. So basically calving April through June. And then I'm asking those 2-year-olds to catch up into April the next year. They have to catch up a month. And this year worked pretty well. We had about, I think it was like 85 or 87% of them bred up in the first cycle. And another like 5-10% in the second cycle, and like 5% open, something like that. We had a wreck with scours. That was a lot of fun when we had that big heat wave in June. I'm sure you guys had that too. With a bunch of calves and scours, a lot of IV in June. You got a lot of other shit going on. So this is Erica, his sister. She was kind of out there with David. They were the ones doing it. So yeah, increased quality of life. Hopefully, didn't quite hit that mark last year, but I still think we're in a better spot. It gives us flexibility in marketing. So this year we're currently in a pink eye rack. And hay prices are supposed to be pretty high because look around, there's not a lot of snow, might not be a lot of water again. So what can we do with that? Well, we can sell our stocker calves and then sell lighter calves in the fall, decrease your stocking rate for the winter. Don't have to feed as many animals. I think it'll be a good thing for us going forward. Takes you a bit anytime you make management changes to get things worked out. A year, 3 years is a lot in agriculture, right? And that's just before you know the beginning of the story of whether you should continue down that road or not. But I think we're headed in the right direction. Peak lactation is like 60 days after they're calving, right? So if you're calving February, April is a really, really expensive month. So we wanted to try to have as many cattle as possible hitting green grass in that peak lactation. Reduce our fed costs in that spring. And my main driver, I got sick and tired of calving in storms. We're calving out in the fields, and it was basically at the point where we need to build barns or change. And I don't want to build barns. So they're calving out and about. I think that there is a death window with predators. I think there is a small window, I don't know how big it is, I shouldn't say small, I think there's a window of time when the bears wake up, specifically the bears, but even wolves, you know, they're always around. They don't den up, but where wildlife aren't calving yet, right? There's not an abundance of like wildlife food easily accessible. That early May, I think can be a death window. Currently, we still calve in that area, but a little bit closer to home. Our second cycle calvers and our 2-year-olds are a little bit past that, more when the deer and elk are starting to calve. And I'm hoping that that's enough that we won't have much depredation. But Logan said pretty well, like if you're losing however many calves, right? There's a threshold that you can't stand anymore, but we're losing a bunch just to bugs. And that's in the storms, freezing, sloppy. Like, I'll lose a couple of bugs, to bears, just as I will the bugs, right? We don't really think of it in those terms. Now, if you're getting 50 killed by a bear, now you're like, I might have to change something. If you're losing 5, 10 to bears, you're gonna lose that to bugs. I mean, everybody loses that to bugs. So, yes, it's a concern moving forward, but hoping to address it in other ways. So I sure like Kevin when it's sunny. It's a lot better. So with our stalker program, this is on a half pivot. And you can see the full pivot in the background. This been going on 5 years-ish. Started on the half pivot, transitioned into the full pivot. We went over, visited Race King's operation. He has chicken care set up on his, came home, modeled these after that. So they have just a permanent electric fence that splits it basically in half on both pivots. Follows the wheel tracks. If you wanted to hit, you could get in there and hit, but and I just string temporary poly wire off of that, and they get moved every day in the summertime. When we first started, we started to taper our fertilizer, so we bought this place in 2014. Before that, it was mostly flood irrigated, and this guy put 2 pivots on it. They were fertilizing it for hay production. When we started doing intensive grazing with our stockers, we started to taper that fertilizer, so just cutting it by an X percentage each year. And this year was the first year we didn't fertilize either one. The full pivot had about 3-year window, and I think the half pivot had a 4 or 5 year taper. And for a bit, that full pivot was hayed and grazed part as we were doing it. And then this year, I had 700 stockers in one group that went between those 2 pivots, and then went through a bigger rotation where the cows also hit. And when I first started on that half pivot, I had about 6 AUMs to the acre, and then it went down to like 4.25 to 4.5, kind of bouncing there for another 3 years. And this year on that half pivot, it hit 7.35 AUMs to the acre, and on the full pivot was like 5.5. And things that I've learned with this is that time really matters. Your timing matters. How much water you're applying matters. So I don't have it documented super closely, but if we were haying, both these pivots were going a lot. And I only have one going now. First thing in the spring, depending on how much rain or snow moisture you had melt down into it, affects that a lot, but might have them both running for a little bit to get that soil moisture built up, depending on other factors. And then usually it's just one of them going, and then I'll switch it to the other one. And we've been monitoring this half pivot for a few years now with a third-party source, and some of the things. One thing he told me the first time we dug a hole, he's like, see how slimy your soil is. Yeah, he's like, you're applying too much water. Like, okay. So started paying a lot more attention to that. I was probing a lot more to see what that looked like. And we're also looking at earthworm counts, and like you dig a hole, not one there. Dig one, there's one. This year, the sliminess was better, and that's just management. That's just my management doing better, paying more attention. But our earthworm, we didn't dig a hole without finding 2 or 3 this year. As far as soil health is increasing, we're putting down a lot of soil organic matter that you can see on the right side of that fence, trying to increase water infiltration and water holding capacity, which are big deals in droughts. So it's been a fun deal and been really good for us.
Is there any alfalfa mix in there? Or is that all grasses?
It's all grass, so it's all, this is pretty much all native grass, native wild hay, so it's timothy, foxtail, all that type of stuff. The other thing that I've noticed is the diversity that has increased, diversity of grasses, and also a lot more clover. Than intensive grazing. The lower half of that full pivot was farmed up when we got it. They tried to plant alfalfa, didn't get it to take. So we did like 1 year barley and then we planted into some improved grasses. But yeah, it's just grass.
Did you test the protein content in the feed itself at all?
In the grasses?
Yeah.
No, I haven't. That's one thing I've struggled with weight gain on those pivots. I haven't got that figured out quite yet. It's like this last year, I was moving them in the middle of the day. I was leaving a lot more feed. So I was trying to move them when they're full, trying to increase their daily intakes, trying to hit those grasses when the sugar content was higher. Still not hitting marks that I'd like to hit, but I mean, if I'm hitting 7.3 AUMs an acre, you can increase the number of animals, then you can run more. You don't have to gain quite as much for it to be economically beneficial. Yeah, so our grass finished beef program. Like Cole said, a lot of our stuff still goes down Commodity Road, but this has been a really good deal for us. What I really like about it, besides connecting the consumer to what you're doing, getting people to care about open landscapes and what ranches provide, other than just food, is cat appreciation. It's not zero on our place, but it's almost there. So every cow that's not antibiotic or stifled that can get fat goes to get burgered and the primals get pulled off of her. With our heifer program, we are running about 300 heifers and they get 21 days to breed. And if they're bred in the first cycle, they're replacement. If not, they go to be a beef. It really allows you, it connects well with our other enterprises. And it's our highest gross margin per AUM raised that we have. So if you can scale this, scaling your profitability, there's obviously some limits as far as how much you could finish. Obviously, our winters are hard. A lot of our animals, we're going youngest 24 months probably. A lot of them go longer than that. Some customers want fresh. We don't have a lot of cold storage to be able to like just kill 300 head and store them efficiently currently. But in the works, we've got some stuff in the works to try to scale that because it's our best enterprise as far as the cattle that you can graze on grass.
Who does your production processing for you?
We're currently using Superior and White's out of Man.
Was that a problem last year? Were you far enough scheduled ahead that you didn't end up?
So we were fortunate that the brothers had the foresight. I think they started this close to 2002, 2003. So they've been doing this for almost 20 years. Not always at the scale that we're doing it now, but so we kind of had our positions locked in. There's a lot of opportunity costs there because you hear people scaling their sales 300-400%, right? We couldn't because we couldn't get them killed. We had the animals, but we couldn't get slots.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's one of the, besides what you can actually finish on your landscape, what you can still store in cold storage, that's the biggest bottleneck probably, right? Where can you go? What can you get killed? And how that it looks coming to the consumer matters way more than I ever thought it would. I mean, we had, when we went to White's, it was just like wrapped up in like freezer paper. That was a no-go. This, our other ones were like flat 1 pound packages. You can see it stacked real nice. That matters to the consumer way more than I think it should, but it matters a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And, so yeah, not just can you get it killed, but can you get it packaged correctly for what you, yeah, the marketability of it, right? Like, so it's hard. I'm not saying everybody here should direct market, because it's damn hard, but it, you can do some of it, it's, can be highly beneficial. I mean, it's paying an entire person back on a ranch currently.
Yeah, my brother does direct marketing on a small scale. And the problem he had is he had scheduled out every 3 months. He had a cow going, it had somebody buying it.
Yeah.
And then he got essentially bid out of his slots. All of a sudden he had cows ready to go and they said, nope, we don't have slots for you. They were willing to pay more for it and kicked him out of the slots.
Yeah, it's tough.
And that happened a lot over in the Bitter. And so, yeah, it's
Lolo.
Lolo, yeah, was at Hamilton Pack when they changed over
Mhm.
over there. And then, yeah, it was bloody.
Yeah.
I mean, it was amazing how many people were looking for places to kill. I mean, they were looking everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I know, probably half a dozen, probably more like 10, just in my like circle of friends, you know, Reese Melhoff started one over there. Some guys there by Boulder, there was like 3 or 4 in our valley in 2020 that were like, they're not giving us anything sale barn, right? So people like started to do that. And if you're trying to get in at that time, it was hard.
It was, yeah.
You know, it's really hard, but, so yeah, we were very fortunate and pretty much every aspect for the brothers and their open-mindedness and willing to try new things. And this one that's been paying off pretty well for us.
How long do you hang the animals after you kill them?
Honestly, I'm not sure. Not the one that's figured on that. Do you know?
I think it's 14.
14 days.
Yeah,
We were doing, we got up to where we were killing like 200 in a year. And, we were working with the Nature Conservancy. We found that we had a contract with the San Diego Zoo for hamburger. Well, grass fat didn't supply enough fat for the hamburger, so we had but people that wanted, they didn't want any kind of suet, they wanted suet that was raised the right way, so that made quite a difference. And then we finally got into killing semi-lot loads. We had to go to Minneapolis to kill them. And then we put them into another cold storage so we could dry age them for 3 weeks. And that really made a difference in the tenderness of the meat. These are 2 to 3 year old now.
Yep.
And then we did a big push to sell it in New York City. There's a specialized restaurants there that would take time, seasonal meat, you know, because this time of year you didn't have meat that you could kill and hang because they would start going downhill after grass fed north. So we had tests with Chef's Club in New York City, and they couldn't tell the difference, or they could tell the difference, but it was a different difference than corn fed or grass fat. We won some awards in each of those tests that they did. I think we had 1 year where were able to market to those restaurants, and then 9/11 hit, and all those restaurants went out of business. There we were stuck with a bunch of cattle, and we didn't have any trouble getting rid of them because there was by Coleman's beef, and they were looking for cattle priority there. That put an end to the conservation beef program. But it really made a difference to age in 3 weeks. That's hard to do.
Yeah, especially with space and storage and just getting charged for extra days.
I think it's worth saying that, you know, the topic is soil health, but still, you know, one of the reasons why it overlaps so much with the meat program is simply because multi-species, you know, certainly plays into soil health. Brian mentioned we have a band of sheep show up in early July, stay through in the months of July and August. And for 20 years, it started with the grant from the Sheep Institute where we didn't own the sheep, but that grant paid the freight. And sheep came originally from the Hibbert family and then later the Bacchuses, now currently the Bacchuses. And our it really has been, and for us, a knapweed success story. Keeping those knapweed from going to seed over time. And yet, you know, with a family that's trying to bring our generation back and have more people in the community, which is a big part of the quality of life of living in that place, owning them sheep is something that we think a lot about. Again, we used to be a sheep ranch, but markets is huge. So there's a market for them. And the same sort of question with right now, all of our beef liver, the most part has flukes. And so it's mostly not saleable in these irrigated meadows. And so we, you know, I know this sounds crazy to neighbors, it even sounds crazy to us, but running poultry behind cattle is really, you know, there's a couple of folks that have plant in the box setups now that can do 1,000 birds a day. There's one in Helena now, there's one in Howard. And if we could sell that, that's another enterprise we could stack. And so we have a real interest in, you know, and that starts to have a real soil health timing. You know, that is related to, you know, what you talked about with, if you're decreasing the amount of water you're putting on the pivot and gone to zero on your fertilizer, and at the same time, your production has increased. You know, that's obviously a significant benefit to the ranch to keep it in business and keep the land open. But your soil's performing a little bit more for you. And so I think it's just something to say about how does a meat program or our ability to market our agricultural products tie in? Soil health ties in, as you know, and
Yeah, and the benefit, like a lot of benefits about stacking enterprises, like one, different animals graze different things, right? And the other one that I was learning about over in Billings this last week is the manure and the different insects that brings in and can help really break down your soil in an organic manner and create healthy soil. You know, like about balance, right? Like a lot of times like, oh, I got a fly problem. Well, maybe you have a predator problem. You don't have enough predators keeping the flies away, right? It's just like, it's all about this balance, and the more stacked enterprises that you can do, just increases diversity, and diversity is key. So.
If you look back at the old farmers, my dad was a farmer in South Dakota, and he always wanted to get away from farming when he moved to the Bitterroot. But he had a hard time getting away from being diversified in what he was raising.
Yeah.
Because that's how, if one crop went bad, you had another one to back it up. And back in South Dakota, my mother raised chickens because my dad had hogs. And what kept the flies under control were her chickens that she then butchered every Sunday to take to the store. And that's how, you know, it was this process.
Yeah.
And the monoculture that we've now gotten into is not necessarily healthy for anything from the soil to the animal.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, I think we were talking before we got started here, Scott and Cole were mentioning these two guys in Colorado, potato farmers who were interseeding flowers with, you know, within, if I understood it right, within the potato rows for, you know, to cultivate habitat for the predators of the aphids. Kind of similar.
Yeah. Diversity in economics and in what, and ecologically, right? Like it's both ways.
It's a circle.
We're not there yet, but it's down the pipe, hopefully.
I don't know that I just mentioned this really quickly, which is our attempt to take the little program that we have now in the local beef end and to scale it up to a degree where we can actually control processing, which we've not been able to control you know, at 300 head a year, that's not very many a week. And in order to make a plant pay, you know, it needs to be in the 35, 40 head a week range to break even by our math. And so, you know, it's hard to reach more consumers unless you have really high quality processing and you're proud of the product. And yet you can't get to those consumers until you get that processing. And it's, so we also had an experience from 2012 to 2016, and this was where I got back from college and went to work for a co-op that my dad had been part of through the Ranching for Profit Network. They started a grass-fed beef coal cow co-op. They were aggregating coal cows and bulls. And so by default, they didn't have growth hormones. They're mostly pasture animals. So we were trying to get a low-cost, scalable grass-fed domestic beef supply. And so we started aggregating and picking up these cattle in semi-loads from ranches, bringing them to Greeley. We found a little processor that did 100 head per day, and it's a lot more economical than Montana processing prices. Found a buyer out of Kansas. She was mixing grass-fed beef with sweet potato and flax and making these omnivore burgers through her company, and we were selling semi-loads of trim. And yet it was not resilient. It wasn't a resilient model in the sense that woman, her company, the majority of her shares were purchased and they discontinued that product. About the same time, the packer in Greeley had a heart attack, died, and his wife had to sell the grinding facility. About in 2015, Cool was repealed, and so our domestic grass-fed beef argument wasn't working. And so, and just, you know, even recently, like a couple of the retail outlets that the Mannix program has, you know, it might be taking a good volume, and you kind of talked about this too, where 9/11 hits and you have a shock to the system. It's just not very resilient. So this is a direct-to-consumer attempt to say, okay, today we sell to 350 people who buy an average of 10 pounds a month. It's 350 accounts, families. They buy an average of 10 pounds per account per month. And can we scale that by an order of magnitude? If we could sell to 3,500 or 10,000 people in this region and sell direct, it's harder to get those customers. It takes some time, but once they're there, they don't just, you know, a huge bulk of them fall away, or it becomes less likely. And so we're trying to create this company now called Old Salt. That's what I do full time. And it's owned by the producers that supply it. And then it's teaming them up with chefs and butchers. So we launched our first restaurant just, you know, back in October, and there's more than 100 people there through there per day. And we're telling the story about this meat company that we're producing, that we have coming. Now we've got 2 more restaurants in the pipeline. And the restaurants don't move a volume of beef. They put eyes on the brand. And our goal is to have a processing facility that is ready as early as the last part of this year, possibly early 2023, where we would process custom for other ranches, but also process for our own brand as we work to grow. And basically just try to say, hey, all these Montanans are moving here for the outdoors. All these people from the region care about those landscapes. Let's try to build a relationship with individuals and families. And our hope is that as we can sell beef to those folks, there will be a multi-species opportunity there too. Easier to sell multiple proteins to the same customer that already trusts you than to acquired customers. And so we're hoping that this is also part of the soil health picture. The way that the industry has, you know, consolidated and market options have decreased over time, that decreases your economic stability as an operation, and it decreases the bandwidth and the talent back on the farm. And that decreases your ability to manage the resource. So it's part of our just effort to control our destiny.
So are the potatoes locally sourced, conservation minded also?
No, I mean, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't know much about the potato source. It's from Bausch.
Okay.
And Bausch may be conservation minded. I just don't know a lot about it. But I would say like the buns are from Wheat, Montana. Wheat Montana farms were recently purchased. That gentleman he was actually met with us this past weekend. Blue Sky Grains. By the way, I don't mean to say anything about Bausch. It's simply that all I mean to say is that I don't know much about production practices there. It was just, we thought, well, it's a local source and we can get it from a distributor. Same with Wheat Montana buns. the grains aren't from around, it's all our meat, we have a brisket chili and the burgers, and then, you know, they're fried in beef tallow, but we don't have the capacity to do tallow yet, so it's a tallow soybean mix that comes from Cisco. And, you know, we basically just said we gotta start somewhere and we'll, it's all our meat and we'll work to make it more and more local as we can. But,
It's got a pencil in the meantime.
but that, yeah, it's got a pencil, you gotta be able to just pull it off. And we're so used to, you know, like Brian said, everybody, you know, especially during COVID, but they're looking for other opportunities. And so everybody started up their own little program. Everybody's got a blog, everybody's got a website. And at a certain level, it feels like we've got to create an experience. It's kind of like breweries have done for years. Not a perfect analogy because breweries haven't done that for grain.
Yeah, but everybody likes beer.
But it's just, it's a start. It's an experience. It's something more than the bare commodity that is purely anonymous. We're trying to put a face to it a little bit. I think, is that where are we at on the slides? Because we're coming up on 40 minutes and we want to make it mostly discussion. This, we already mentioned the sheep enterprise, which has been going on for about 20 years. We utilize a lot of partnerships over the years, whether it's stream restoration, whether it's utilizing CSB or equip to thin, you know, encroachment timber, doing a lot of prescribed fire, you know, and that's been pretty good where you can do it. We've utilized conservation easements over the years, and that's been how the only way we grow the ranch. But there's 4 permanent conservation easements on the ranch that make up most of our acreage. We value that tool, even though it's not perfect. And it's been, you know, in our case, because of the place it's in and the habitat value, it has been enough money that has made sense to basically just make us a little bit more contiguous by the ranch that you now live on.
Yeah, we were fortunate back in 2014 when we bought a place next to us. That WP was focusing a lot of money in our region on the south end of Glacier, right? Bob Marshall's right there, and like our ranch got a highway that goes 141 kind of goes through it, but we have this big corridor from one end to the other. So we're just fortunate that we're high priority, you know, understand that's not everybody's going to do that, but where our values lie, and it's been good for us.
So this is a bit of a segue, but I think it's worth talking about. So I'll just briefly introduce. I'm not sure how well you can see this up here, but I have been helping, amongst other things, with a thing called the Montana Soil Outreach Project. So over the last year, basically it started, call it last summer, and it'll finish this coming summer. And essentially, it's a big listening effort to say, how can Montana ranchers and farmers be better supported from their perspective in managing soil? And we're reaching out through several different ways. The main way, if you don't mind flipping to the next slide, is the website, which is this QR code. Snap a picture of it even tonight if you want it. Just use your camera to go to the website. But it's the Montana Association of Conservation Districts is hosting that website, and they along with the Montana Watershed Coordination Council are kind of co-partners along with many other partners who are leading this effort. Funding came from the NRCS and the state DNRC, and then also from smaller entities like the Department of Agriculture. And essentially what it is if you go to that URL, there's 5 meetings this spring. It's 5 in person, 1 virtual. There's one in Dillon, April 15th. That'll be the closest one here, but they're in different parts of the state. There's also 2 surveys. There's a short version, which you really can take in as quick as you want, 5 and 10 minutes, or a longer version that allows you to kind of go into more nuanced depth if the short version frustrates, because it's hard to get people to take surveys and they're paying the button. But on the other hand, they are, you know, especially in COVID times when people aren't meeting as much, they are a way to reach different corners of a big state. And then these meetings are another way to reach folks. And then there will be a report created that basically says, here's what we heard from people, and here's a set of recommendations that as best we can discern, seem to arise out of what people said. When I say as best we can discern, there's a group that meets every Tuesday. They're the ones that, help to write the grant applications, to go do the listening. They're the ones that shape the questions. They're the ones that, it's basically an open steering committee. Anybody's invited. It happens every Tuesday from 1 to 2:30. And it will be the same group inviting as many people as want to participate that says, is there something we can discern out of this that would be a recommendation or a handful of recommendations? And there's all kinds of things, obviously it's a diverse state and very different kinds of production. Helmville in the Blackfoot Valley is not really farm country, so we didn't grow up with a lot of farming experience. And in other places, growing potatoes, or we're growing sugar beets, we're growing wheat, barley, lentils, and, oilseed crops, pulses. And still, there are common threads to the soil discussion, common principles that apply, and, to different, the same principles to very different landscapes and to different production practices. And on the other hand, we're hearing all kinds of things already, like, hey, we feel like, especially in the dryland context, and especially when you are in such severe drought like we are, cover crops might be being pushed a little hard. And yet we still see some value in diversifying our, the crops. We still see some value in decreasing the artificial, ammonia. So, and we, whether you're doing that for climate reasons or whether you're doing it just to save money on inputs. It really is a topic that cuts across the political spectrum. And so we have about 170 responses so far, I think, in that range to the short survey, a handful of responses, maybe current on that number, but maybe 15 to the in-depth survey that takes longer. And we'd love to have several hundred by the time these in-person meetings happen. The in-person meetings are really where the nuance comes and where you can dig in. And so at each one of those meetings, that we'll be kind of saying, here's what we've heard for your sort of region from the survey data. How does that strike you? Does it resonate or does it not? And anyway, there's a lot of soil health programs out there, whether they're federal or state or run by a nonprofit or whether they're very local. Obviously, conservation districts are the original soil health kind of infrastructure. And so I think it's really cool that the Association of Conservation Districts has taken this on in a leadership role. And I just encourage folks that have an interest in weighing in to scan that QR code or go to Montana Soil at macdnet.org. That was a cheap, it was a cheap URL, but Polina and David, they've been participating right along, and so they can absolutely direct you to send you the link.
And I'll be driving over on 15, so we can take. It's a government raid. If I was still in South America, I'd say, yeah, we could probably take like 15 or 20 of them.
Hop in the back.
Yeah. But I could take 4 or 5 for sure.
But I mean, we've been hearing a lot of interest in livestock crop integration, particularly where cropland and rangeland is kind of meet. And, certainly that's the case around the Rocky Mountain front and the border of the breadbasket there, our gold triangle. Might be the case kind of in that sugar beet country and rangeland interface, take that Red Lodge, kind of Beartooth front out on the plains. Yellowstone, Valley, but it's even the case in a smaller degree, Townsend and this country. In a lot of cases, it seems to be happening where ranches are getting entrepreneurial and saying, hey, this might mess with your crop insurance, but I'll share the cover crop seed expense or pay it in exchange for some late season grazing. And farmers are going, maybe that's some soil health benefit, maybe that takes some of the risk out of it for me. And those ranches are having to get entrepreneurial about, okay, well, can I get livestock that are more, fungible, like stockers, and maybe, they're getting out of the mother cow herd or at least they're scaling that part of their enterprise back and going into stockers more so that they can be more mobile, not buy the farm ground, just lease it. And then they're having to solve water and fencing infrastructure questions that a lot of those guys don't have. And yet they're doing it. We got polywire, we have some mobile facilities and, so some of the questions are, is there a way similar to the sheep program that I kind of shared earlier where a grant originally helped with the freight? But then when that grant went away, we kept doing it because we saw we were making progress on that. Sheep guys liked it because they got free grazing and we liked it because we got weed control. And it didn't really compete a lot with the cattle. And so is there some analogous thing that we could be doing to spur livestock crop integration as a state? Is it about more education? Is it about research at MSU that could be more sort of applied? Is it about just more funding for that research? What are people experiencing? Is it about alternative markets for crops? Species that are maybe hard to market right now, processing infrastructure. So with that, I'll just say, I would just really encourage you to participate if you would. Make it all the more valuable. And then also, whether it's the questions, feedback about our ranch and what we're doing, or whether it's about that soil health outreach, we're like at 49 minutes. And we'd love to just have discussion.
Yeah, you brought up the sheep cover. Do they have a full-time herder with it, or do you guys have fences that actually hold the sheep?
Well, there's boundaries.
There's a guy in Townsend that I rode on the bus with in North Dakota to Gabe Brown's place. And he's like, yeah, we're running sheep. I'm like, oh, how do you keep them in? He's like, get out. Yeah. All right. No, it comes with full-time herder.
They're on the backside of Canyon Ferry, so they have to keep it. So, I mean, I think it's, in their case, it's a Peruvian family. And there's probably been like, I think there's 8 brothers maybe.
They're probably.
And if you get a different one each year, but they're really skilled, but.
Sometimes you gotta tell them, the one year they shot like 3 lions. They're like, hey, you gotta stop shooting lions, man. We're gonna get in trouble real quick here. Like, they protect that flock like at all costs, but.
But they're with them
They're
every
cool
day.
people.
We move sheep camp, and so we do some things. The language barrier is challenging for us, but dad mostly has, kind of figured that out, and they communicate as best they can, and they teach us a lot.
And he doesn't even have a smartphone, so yeah, if he can do it, let us know.
Brian, would you explain how you guys water the cattle when you're going
Yeah.
the pivot?
Yep, so it comes off of a well that's by his brother's house. It's a pretty good well. I think it's like 40 gallons a minute. And it's buried like 5 feet deep, so that's a winter line. And that tease comes up, and then it's just got that just above ground water line with the quick couplers on it. Dad made 2 tanks that I pulled behind a 4-wheeler. It's got like a little ball valve on the bottom. So every time I move the paddock, I move the water, just quick attach and plug it. Dump the water, over to the next one, plug it back in. Quick, efficient, it's handy. I don't have any pictures of it, sorry.
I know at Billings, everybody was asking how the watering systems worked on some of those.
Yeah,
So you did it that way. Somebody ran it down off of one of their drops.
yeah, I've seen guys tie them into their like pivot centers and stuff. Yeah, a lot of guys are getting creative with that, and this above ground stuff, like usually you get kind of grass growing over it, and like that first little spurt might be kind of warm, but other than that, since it's coming off well, it really doesn't, it's not too warm. I know people that can be an issue in places, but people get pretty creative. And I mean, if you're doing this under a pivot, you got water there somewhere, you just gotta figure out how to get it. I like moving the water a lot more, so I have like little bare spots, some bare spots that I have little gravel too. I put in more so I can alternate spots with them. But some guys go with the traditional, just one tank and just wagon wheel off of that. Get a big bare spot with that too, right? So it's people get hung up on that. I think you need to zoom out and look at the whole field and what you're doing for that whole field and not what you're doing on that one water spot. It's not that, so it'll be all right. In a traditional grazing system, you'd have the same stuff.
What about your salts and mineral? Are you providing it?
Yep. Yeah, that's gonna get attacked this winter as far as reconstruction, but yeah, it's just our custom mineral program, salt mineral in the summer. I move that every day with them. So when I go off the pivots, depending on where they're at with the structure, how much infrastructure I have, like this summer that I had that big group of 700. So under the pivot, it was daily moves. Then when I got out into areas that were at a little less infrastructure, it would anywhere from 1 to 3 days grazes, just depending on water source. If I'm having to go through willows, you know, all that kind of stuff. But I would say in general, you know, like with grazing, it's the higher densities that you have, grazing for less amount of time with longer rest periods, better. Now, under a pivot, like between my first and second pass was like 19 days. Right? And in our country, cool season grasses, so like that first part of May, it's a little slow. And I was over, went through it pretty quick. I had like 300 heifers originally on that half pivot, about 6 acres. You know, and 10 days later, I was at like 3 acres. You know, so like really watching the stages of your grass. Then you hit July or June, you know, and that grass is going like this. So you're trying to move pretty quick. And then when you hit July, that growth slows down a lot, even under irrigated in our country and with our grasses. So then I was at like 28 to 30 days. You know, and then on like dry land, that's only getting hit once. But the principle of higher densities for short amount of graze time with longer rest periods can apply to both irrigated and non-irrigated. Just under irrigated, it fluctuates a lot more. So if you're, say you're in a pasture, so I broke up some dry land this year, like 360 acres, broke it up into like 5-day parcels, 5-day grazes. And there's a lot of poly work because I did not have the infrastructure for that. But theoretically, in my opinion, if you just cut that whole pasture in half one time, right? So they're grazing here, then you move them here. This stuff over here is still getting twice the amount of rest, and you're not doing as much regrazing of each root, right? It's like, yes, there's levels to it, but you just cut that in half, it's better. Then you cut it in thirds, that's better. Like your resources are not the same as mine. You might not have the same water, you might not have the same labor, infrastructure. So it's like, take that into your context, but just know that like it all applies, like still applies.
So you're trying to kind of go with Grace King's plan of, what does he say, 20, 21, 23 paddocks to rotate through.
He's at like 22 days for rest period, so he's got to be right in that 23 paddock range. And he likes to, if I remember correctly, stock that pivot for what that pivot will run all season, right? So say that pivot could run 300 stalkers all summer. That's what he'll stock it with. And currently I'm operating more like, I'm looking at also like a bunch of acres that are cows graze once, then go up to the mountains. And typically we might hay a little bit of it, but then they'd come back down and then they'd graze it again. So it's like 2 rotations, right? Well, if I have 700 and I get through both these pivots twice, and then I go hit that same rotation those cows did, and then come back to those pivots. Now I got 3 grazes over there. I got 4 grazes on my half full pivot. So I'm operating a little bit more like trying to maximize my irrigated ground with one herd versus like one herd in each area for how long that'll hold it, if that makes sense. So
You must be pretty good at math.
me,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that.
It's complicated.
I think it takes you like 3 days, 2-3 days, right? So like I started out with 300 heifers. And like the first one, I was like, oh, not enough acres. And then like day 3, I kind of had that, and then I was gauging the grass just with your eye of what it had. And then I use OnX maps I can map it out, like there's 6 acres. So I'm like, okay, I know 6 acres wasn't quite enough. Then I gave them 7. And then I see what that looks like. And then the third day, you're like, okay, I kind of see what it's at. And then you're judging what the grass is doing on the go. And I'm just mapping it on my phone. It's not exact, but it's pretty close. Gets you close. So I'm constantly mapping with my phone and using my eye. And then when those 700 stalkers come in, I had to re-gauge my whole eye because they were anywhere from 450 pounds to 650 pounds. So the needs in that group were like a big variation. And so, yeah, that first paddock, you might go, oh, that one's gonna need some extra rest. Or you might go, I have a pile of grass here still, should have been a lot smaller. For like 1 or 2 days, then you'd be surprised that, like, if you go and just observe those things, like, a few days, and your eye will be gauged to what your grasses and cows, and then the more you do it, the better you get, right?
Do you find using Onyx to be fairly user friendly
Very, yeah.
for that application?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So you draw polygons,
yeah, I keep that around.
and then you're able to work through them through time pretty readily.
So it's not like the best, like if you want to like do record keeping and,
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot of platforms out there that can, it'll calculate your AUMs, it'll tell you all this stuff, right? And
Right.
we're just not like super tech savvy yet. And I have Onyx for
Onyx already exists, just use that. I used it today for a 310 permit presentation, and actually.
yeah, right, like I already had it in hunting.
Yeah.
And so instead of trying to convince the ranch to ship all of its records onto like one platform so that I could map some stuff out, I was like, oh, just start using this.
I ask you in part because I have a younger brother, 5 years my junior, and he's been playing around with AutoCAD, kind of like SketchUp. It's a really nice program for mapping things out spatially. And then I was like, oh man, I just use Google Earth when I put together presentations and draw polygons. But there are advantages to some of those softwares where, yeah, for records keeping and like rolling through it as almost like a PowerPoint through time to see like you working across these polys and do those acreages and what times.
I think
That's
Race,
pretty cool.
I think Race was using Mastermap.
Yeah.
That's true.
Match maps, I can't.
Who's Maya?
I think
Race.
Cooper might be, he's using those boys out of Wyoming. Can't remember which one that's. But yeah, there's a bunch of them out there. But it definitely helps to have a mapping system there because you can calculate acreages. You can download it offline. It shows you where you're at. Yeah, it'd be a little harder without it.
I did ask about your mineral program.
Mhm.
What you do mineral. And everyone, bear in mind, no experience with any of this stuff correctly. Watch a lot of YouTube, watch a lot of Greg Judy.
Yeah.
Have been reading a lot these past couple of years. Farming practices. So I'm wondering how common it is for a few folks to use like a box of mineral that's cut into like 20 different.
Greg's doing.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it separately.
And I think it just intuitively makes a lot of sense to me. It's like Fred Provenza's work and sort of that nutritional wisdom piece of animals, being able to sort of pick and choose which micronutrients they might need, which minerals they might need, as opposed to a broad spectrum. Does anyone do that, I guess?
Do you remember when Dad did that years ago? Do you remember why he quit?
No idea. Problem that I can see with that and probably in you guys' country and our country is just application, right? So if you're up on a Forest Service lease, that's hard to do up there, right? So like if they're if you're on a cookie cutter place, Texas, Midwest,
Or like
or even our irrigated bottom grounds. But even like, I mean, I had like 4 or 5 mineral bunks for 700 head. And you're like, okay, well, maybe you don't want that many in the head, but there's benefits to that too. To me, it just comes down to like, what battles you wanna pick, right? And, I think getting like soil samples and a custom mineral program, like looking at what you're lacking and trying to customize that is important, but when you think about the landscapes that we're working on, it's hard for me to picture that being, convenient and worth the work.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. How do you find out if it's lacking? Do you see that in the represented in the meat, or you tested soil, or where do you?
Honestly, I haven't been a part of it. I know that, like they've had some people come out, but I think a lot of times they're testing soils and looking at, which also can vary from like one step to the next, right? But you get kind of a broader picture, but we're gonna have Bob Sager, he's a private nutritionist out of White Sulphur, come out and, go through our program. We're, say this right now, I guess, this is Dave's quote, sometimes soil health is just as much about not what to do, but what to stop doing, right? So 22, this year, we're going to stop pouring our cattle. Cooper Hibbard uses a copper lick, to help, I think it's copper.
Sulfate.
Yeah, copper sulfate. It's got, I don't know all the ingredients for it, but it helps with parasites, and then internal parasites is something else. Basically, the point is you can try to address some of these parasite problems through your mineral program, right? I'm gonna have Bob Sager come out and look. We're gonna look through our whole thing and try to develop that. Because right now, we poured all our cattle. Doesn't really look like it, right? So it's a lot of those, we used to use ivermectin. Started learning more about soil health, like, oh, that's not good. Well, none of them are really good. And also, if you have to change every 3 years because all of your parasites become resistant to it, the hell's the point? Now it's just a product somebody's selling you. Just another input for them to sell to you, in my opinion.
You find that a lot with a lot of mineral programs. as well.
Yeah, exactly, right? So like, back to the custom thing, like a lot of people are just trying to sell you something. So if you can go make your own mineral program and tailor it to your custom needs, there's gonna be a lot of bumps in the road. We'll probably have some cows die on their backs. Like this winter, we went through, sorted some first cycle calvers, second cycle calvers. So that we didn't have all one bunch come calving time for space and water issues. Broke the gate down, they all mixed, right? And why did they break the gate down? Because they were rubbing like hell on it. So it's like, we're already doing some of that, right? So this kind of ties back into the soil health thing, and sometimes stopping doing something is good for the soil and your pocketbook. Same time.
Well, and on that, you talked about doing the cyclic grazing, following the cows with chickens in tractors. And was that mostly for soil, for utilization of the manure and the scratching propensity of chickens to mix everything in? Or is it for bug control as well, or a combination of the above?
I mean, I personally, I would say probably our family too, know nothing about chickens.
Zero.
And yet, you know, we're watching YouTube like everybody else is and just asking the question of.
I appreciate that goal. I felt a little bit like the loony in a puff crowd.
You don't watch a lot of YouTube.
Well, I mean, like, it's really interesting what people are doing, and we're asking, like, okay, well, is that a way that you increase fertility? Like, maybe it's for nitrogen reasons, maybe it's for breaking up cow patties and distributing them, maybe it's for parasites. We have 200 animals, pink eye right now,
No more than that.
more than that. I mean,
We're dealing with microplasma. I don't know if anybody here's dealt with that.
Like,
If not, hope you never have to.
but I mean, you know, for the first, was this 4 loads of yearlings that you purchased, and, you know, maybe if something came in.
Yeah.
But anyway, like, will birds, mitigate that a little bit. I mentioned liver flukes. That, you know, ultimately, I think, chickens are supposed to mitigate that. But at what kind of, you know, most of those are in our irrigated meadows. If you just had chickens going around those pivots, they're probably gonna pick up liver flukes, and the rest of them are, you know, pasture in the bottoms. You have to rent a lot of chickens, and that just comes back to the markets. If you can sell those chickens, it'd be a great thing for the Helmville community, which is, you know, we spend a lot of time thinking about.
Hopefully KFC.
I mean, like, that's, and, you know, how do you have more kids in school, keep the school bus running? keep the
Everybody
community
picking
going?
up those eggs.
Pheasant hunting's pretty big. I just sell shotgun.
Very good.
You guys tried anything other than intensive grazing for directly targeting the soil health?
So we're not like we ever did a bunch of farming or plowing, but doing less of that, right? So, not like our hands are clean or anything, because we're currently buying some alfalfa hay, right? But trying to farm less. Not really gonna be farming anything up, turning over the soil, sometimes I question if we should to try to plant something that can stick up through our snow and you don't have to have as much hay, you know, there's a lot of nuance there and conversation to be had, but that would be another one of them. Like I said, going forward, gonna try to pour less. Reduce our, you know, there's only one field that we fertilize currently, and that's one that we don't feed back onto. Sheep with the knapweed versus trying to get around with a helicopter and spray a lot of that foothills country, utilizing sheep to mitigate that. That was like, you know, what, 10 years before that really started to show, but ended up being worth it. Instead of being a helicopter guy, we know flying a helicopter is a lot of fun. To spray. Yeah, I mean, we're just like you guys, right? Just learn as much as we can going forward, trying to do the best we can.
I think, like, there's a couple of dry land applications where, down in the Raven place, for example, where there was a tired field that had been farmed, dry land, probably shouldn't have been, but a long time ago. And, you know, I think they were asking themselves the question, can we freshen this up? And so I don't know if you tilled it the first time and then tried to plant a kind of a cocktail mix and then got no rain. And then tried again and got no rain. And then,
I think it was already like pretty not soddy, so I think it actually started no-till. We bought a no-till, tried that. Like I said, no rain, tried it again, didn't work. Timed it perfect with the rain, didn't work. Tried tilling it, didn't work. So currently it's like this big bare spot, right? Like if you want me to take you to like just an ugly spot on the ranch, I'd take you there. And then it's just like, man, we're not good farmers. Like, so.
I mean, so like little experiments like that just have obviously a lot to learn. I mean, the Coal Masters has been out and we've dug the pits and, you know, we've had people point out things to us and we tested for things that we can't understand the tests that we're reading. And I guess, you know, all that is just our own learning experience. I mean, doing the tests and then knowing what they mean, doing them long enough to see change and then knowing what they mean. I don't know that I don't know that we have a lot to share. I mean, we had grid, you know, we set up grids. Nicole had us mix a bunch of different things. So there was fish oil and there was, you know, I mean, different things. We're literally spraying spray bottle on the grid. And then this was just, what's that? It was to have a learning experience and then we're testing it with the bricks meter, you know, crushing it up and seeing, you know, from one time of day to where it was a little sunnier and then later in the afternoon. These are our bricks changing and we're trying to learn, you know, like how does the sugar content change in the whole of the day? And I just would say that I know of, we've not hit any home runs or it seems to me like.
It doesn't translate to your beef or the hill.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it seems to me like with the sheep and the knapweed, with what you're finding on the pits, with the win of being able to, you know, save a lot of, you know, feeding costs by simply grazing in the windrow because of that airspace allowing the cattle to break through the snow.
Less tractor, you know, less time over the field, less compaction. So like we have a lot of ground that's pretty stubby. Would be hard to get in and graze without like hugging up. That's like kind of our hay ground and we feed quite a bit of hay, you know, we feed a lot of hay. So there's like hay ground, it's like, man, if we could swath graze a little more, that's less times over the field and compaction, less compaction you have, the more deeper your roots can go, right? So like, there's those types of things that we're trying and expanding, but no means we're like, getting ground or anything. It's just like the most drastic ones that I've seen is that intensive grazing, just through water management and intensity of how different that soil looks, how many earthworms you can go find. All, it's like in 2 years just through water management. And like, so maybe it was all water management, maybe I've been over irrigating it forever, I don't know. But I can tell you that I'm seeing way more lagoons in there. And we know that diversity of the species and the different root systems, all that, I don't have to like know all that in depth, right? To know that that's benefiting, like I can see it. I can see it in my AUM numbers. That's the direct, right? That's the most graphic one that I can think of.
Do you try to make it so that when you cut your hay for the next year for that swath grazing, that you make sure you're staggering where you're laying that?
I haven't yet. I think it'd be a good idea, so you have some overlap, and some of that's because it feels like kind of long and narrow, and I don't want to go like this a bunch of times.
I just wondered if you kind of offset so that where your windrow was before, the
Yeah.
next year it's down the middle.
So it's been that way a little bit, but like, I haven't super intentionally done that, and you do see, like, depending on the winter and how much they clean up, there's some areas that was like in a swale that the whole thing just got iced over, that the next year there was like a little bare spot there, right? And in the spring, it's set back some, and we're not far enough down the road to tell you how, like, in 5 years, we gained or lost this much production off of it, right? Like, this was year 3 on this ground. But so far, the benefits outweigh the negatives in my mind, so far, but not far enough down that road to like, I'm doing this everywhere 100% of the time that I can, plus there's external factors.
And you're doing that as your second crop.
No, we just do one crop in our valley, for like 60-day growing season that's not consecutive. Yeah,
What's been your, first of all, if David thinks he's like unknowledgeable and educated as far as this goes, I'm even below that. I only get educated on YouTube, but I can still Wi-Fi.
you must be a river guy.
Yeah, but I can tell you about river and hydraulic, all the great stuff. But in your soil conservation practices and soil health practices, what would be like the most successful thing you've done there, and how has that directly benefited profitability of the ranch or the quality of what you're able to produce? Like, if you could pinpoint one thing that you do on your ranch, and it can go back to 1882 if that's where the most successful period was. But in your opinion, what is the most impactful soil health and conservation practice that you do that impacts your business for the positive?
Well, your dad would probably say partnerships. I don't know if that's what I don't think that's what you're
I mean, you talked about like changing the way you water and less water and certain pastures, paddocks and areas and stuff like that. Going from pivot irrigation or flood irrigation or changing the certain practice that impacted the nutrients of that particular grazing range, or is it less cows on a greater area that caused the ground to be more fertile? I mean, what do you?
Yeah, it's hard to know, when I've been home since 2014, it's not a very big time frame in the scope of the ranch, and it's even smaller when you start talking about the scope of the land and everything that's happened on it. I think in my time frame, it's been intensive grazing. I know it's a lot like, some of this is how much you ground freeze, right? But a lot less runoff, a lot more infiltration there in the springtime even. To me, it's been the biggest thing, and one of the things I've become most passionate about, that I feel like I can scale this and have a big impact, is grazing management. But, I mean, before that has to be a learning, right? It's like, gotta have an open mind, gotta be willing to learn about these things, because like, can't look at, I like to say, don't do something just because dad did it, don't not do something just because he did it. And like, don't demonize your grandpa, because he was probably doing the best he could with the tools that he had at that time. Yeah, it's a hard one, that's a hard question to answer, and like, with the pivot and the, flood, I have a lot of questions there. And I haven't found a lot of people with a lot of like hardcore data answers as far as like, well, we love beavers, right? Like, well, that's kind of what flood irrigation is, and like lake stream flows through like charging up a bunch of swamps and springs. And so I think there's a time and a place for a lot of different practices, just learning where those things are. And so I'd say the best thing is learning. I don't think that's what you're looking for, but
I mean, I think there's a lot of snake oil out there, and just, different, 5 different people might look at the same situation and sell it to you way different. And in my perception of, the way that dad and the brothers operate is they're generally skeptical of their own bias, and they try to practice that. And you want to read something and maybe into an experiment. But if you really test yourself, you're at, have I seen a huge change here? They're open to new things, but not rushing into them. Like as a family, part of our challenge is, I think, it has to do with moving calving seasons. It has to do with any change. We're a slow moving machine, because it's this family decision making process. We're operating the same thing together, and it's just slower to make any big change. And sometimes, what you hear, you hear the typical story of, well, dad or generations had run it into the ground and I was going broke. And so I had no choice except to make this massive change. And now we've just completely turned everything around, and it's rainbows. And, I'm not sure that we've ever made that drastic of a change, because it's been such a slow evolving, inbred family process where we're just kind of negotiating relationships. And sometimes I wonder, have we not seen as drastic changes because we've not just wholesale had a huge failure there or a huge success there? We've just incrementally tried things, instead of moving calving season from March to June, we moved it to like March 15th and then April and then April 15th. And there's strength in that, because you have less disasters, but it takes more time to see change. I think the biggest success we've had, frankly, and this is not meant to be insulting to the soil topic, but the biggest success we've had is we've maintained healthy relationships as a family, as best we could. And so it's not a subdivided property that's broken up into this fragmented human relationships result in fragmented land. And that is usually good for the natural resource. And I don't mean to be kind of cavalier about saying that, but I would just say all of the presentations I've been to, whether it's Gabe Brown, whether it's Greg Judy, whether it's Neil Dennis, or there's kind of a list that we all hear. I don't think we've seen that kind of drastic change on our ranch with any given thing we've done. And yet we're learning a lot about riparian area management and how that affects the fishery, and we're improving over time. And we have actually seen some pretty drastic changes in that. It seems to me like, every little chunk of Montana, its metabolism is a little bit different. And our valley is certainly not a big high performance machine. I mean, short growing season. It's nice in that a drought, we've got a high water table and there's flood irrigation coming down, and we're not maybe as dry, but it also means that the soil is colder later into the spring, and it cools down quicker. And so it's almost seems like our genetic potential is a little bit has a lower ceiling. I don't know, those are just kind of random reactions to it. It seems to me like there's promising multi-species. I think we've certainly experienced that the balance on our landscape of impact and rest, the timing of that really is important. And I think being thoughtful about that over time has paid dividends, but life-changing, oh my God. You know, the big life-changing thing is that the ranch is still intact and relationships are intact and you have the chance to get better next year and keep working.
Yeah, no, I think that's critical. Wasn't intact, you guys could experiment and try new practices and evolve and change, do what you're doing if you didn't have that, so that's great things.
You guys mentioned easements. How have those played out? I mean, is it kind of like, there's the gentleman from Oxbow Ranch, Missoula, yeah, Bart gave a presentation of buildings. And he was essentially, they were leasing some private ground. That owner approached him, was like, hey, look, you should buy this. I'm looking to get out. And they're like, we can't afford that. That's insane. And then they worked with the land trust by Valleys or whatever. They got it. Essentially bridge that gap. Is that how that works? I mean, the land trust comes in, they figure out what is the difference of an appraised land without an easement on it, and what is the value of the land with an easement on it. It will be lower because there is that restriction on it. They raise the difference, and then still pays what's that chunk, or like how does that play out?
I guess the first thing I'd say is, you know, apart from the mechanics of the easements, we've done them for financial reasons, primarily. I mean, we shared the value of having the land intact. But because they were paid easements and substantially paid easements, they allowed us to grow the ranch. There's four of them. The first one was an FWP easement in the 90s. That's our worst one, simply because it was more restricted in management. Could only burn so much sagebrush, you know, over a 5-year period, for example. Now, same biologists who wrote that disagree with that, except it's hard to change. But fire in that sagebrush country is an important thing. So we've been prescribed burning that. We did it this year. And boy, the grassland rejuvenates and the wildlife habitat is impressive. And yet, I think folks, you know, the easement folks, I think, have learned not to be as prescriptive, and that's good. But it's a pain in the butt that we're living with right now. Yeah. On the other hand, you know, at the time, it did provide some money to grow the ranch, so it's a little bit of a trade-off. You know, we have 2 U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service easements, and there's actually 3 U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service easements that are a little less restrictive. It's really about development and minerals, and they leave grazing management and sagebrush management and things like that out. My comment would be, I think it's an important tool, but for the purpose of bringing jobs back to the ranch, for example, we used the most recent easement that we sold to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I think that was 2014, to purchase a couple thousand, and it was we put the whole rest of the ranch under conservation easement and the parcel we were buying. And we used it to pay for most of, we financed a small part, maybe $1 million, but we used it to pay for most of the land that Brandon lives on. But if we were interested in just jobs back on the ranch, it would have been smarter for us to put that cash into and take the tax hit, not 1031, but just take the tax hit and then just draw interest off it into Vanguard or some fund. If we were just interested in salaries of people living in the ranch. So, you know, we used it to buy land, and that's good because, you know, in some ways it sort of protects you from what neighbor would have been who purchased that might not have had a type of community, and it did make us more contiguous, and there's some management logistics.
Water.
You know, water resource, yeah. So anyway, I guess I would say there's trade-offs. I value the tool, and I think this is mostly aping what my dad and uncles would say, but I also think that it can be overvalued in the sense that what is perpetuity? Some land trusts I see in their newsletters, we just put 100 acres under permanent conservation. A perpetuity easement is not the same thing as permanent conservation. Permanent conservation means the talent and the bandwidth and the community manages that land and, you know, forever. And that takes economics. And an easement, you just can't pay for ecosystem services with a one-time perpetuity easement. You can guarantee that, or at least as long as your laws are saying, we can guarantee that it's not subdivided, but that's a lot different than active stewardship and conservation. And so if you ask the land trust, I think, and again, I value the land trust community. I think a lot of folks think about the easement from that end of things as being, wow, that's most of the ballgame. We got like these acres conserved, like up to perpetuity easements. But I asked Dad, for us, the ranch is mostly all under easement now. How big of, like, of the ballgame is that? Like, how big of a deal of the conservation ballgame is that to you? It's like, it's pretty significant, like at least 10%, And so it's like, I think it can be over. Sometimes I think that tool can suck up all of the oxygen in the room and divert the focus from, we need to have a better agricultural system that rewards stewardship through our markets. We need to go to produce, and we need ways to pay for people like Brian and my siblings and cousins that are back on the ranch. And even some of that, but really need to like also look for other tools and other solutions.
I have a couple of questions. So most of your meadows, is it just wild native hay? Is we're just saying, property?
Not native, but wild, but
Yeah.
but just grass hay.
Yeah, grass. Yeah. So,
Yeah, seed grown, yeah.
yeah. And then with the like swath grazing, I guess, have you had any concerns with like just wind flat out blowing it away?
I got asked this question on a webinar the other day. So I saw like in the 3 years that I've been doing this, right, like one cyclone come through in like 20 yards, mess it up. But for the most part, no, because when you're cutting it, we're trying to cut it like around the 10th or 12th of August. So it's kind of like trying to hit max production before like the value of it really drops off. But it's all green still, and you rake it right behind the swather, and then it settles down. So it's not like, when you think of a windrow, you think of you're in a baler going behind a rake and it's this big fluff ball, right? And like the wind comes and there goes half of it. It's all green and it'll sink down. You want it up still, but it shrinks down, so it doesn't blow away much. And there's a guy in eastern Montana that's done some of it. And he's like, I've never had any blow away, and they get way more wind than we do. In our valley anyway. I know you guys get some wind, but yeah, I did some raking in Twin Bridges for a while. It gets windy.
Are you cutting it higher?
No, it's same. I'm not an expert in it, or I'm still learning, but now just cutting it like you would during haying season, but kind of about 10th, 12th of August, and that date could probably adjust for your region of where you think that peak value is of production and nutrients. But because it's green and it's right behind the swather, then it settles down. You really don't get much blown away.
And then with after you like come spring, do you harrow it or brush it or anything, like kind of break up clumps, or just kind of?
No, I don't think that would necessarily be a bad idea. This particular spot, I think you would sink a tractor really fast in the spring. So where we're currently doing it, I'd like to do in some other areas, but there's a value question there. Like, so in your guys' country, you can get 2 cuttings, right, in some areas. So you might be looking at like, well, I can get 2 cuttings and a graze on the regrow. It's like, maybe the value of swath grazing doesn't outweigh that. This current spot is really subby. It was hummocks like this. When we first got it, you couldn't hardly walk through it, couldn't ride a horse through it. My uncle took a disc and he didn't turn anything over, but he just set down just enough to cut the tops off. And he had to get in there just at the right time. Like he did it over a few years because the window was so short to where you could get a tractor in there and do it without sinking. And it was thought out enough that you cut the top sills off. But you basically disc it twice, 2 ways, this way and then this way, and then rolled it. and now we're haying it. But it's still like really soft, so if you go to graze that, you could end up in the same scenario with a bunch of hummocks. So we're like still trying to figure out the best way to manage it, and that swath grazing has been a great tool because that regrowth is hard to go in and get in the fall. So if you have a spot that's really easy to get the regrowth, that value might change for you, or you might be like, I don't need all this regrowth for my stocking rate. I want to try this, and you might find it really helpful. I don't know that, right? That's going to depend on each spot and how many, all those economics come into play. But this spot has been really good for us. I have some questions of like some other spots that we're haying, like what's the value of that regrowth? If I'm not selling pounds of a calf this fall off of it, like if this calf's going to next fall, maybe there's more value in that cow grazing that in February than a pair grazing it that fall if I'm not selling anything off it right away. So your situation is gonna kind of dictate some of that.
Build off of that there, I do a fair bit of swathing, and I've been doing some swath grazing on my own and then swathing for some other people there. Crop variety is big on it. You guys are big on mostly grasses there. If you're getting into any alfalfas, stuff like that there, you're gonna wanna wait until you're on when it's dormant, after a killing frost. And you can keep a lot of your nutritional value with the leaves and stuff on that. At that point, I do it on some grain ground as well. Big issue that I've ran into with doing grain, like PO mixed, was nitrates. If you end up with a stress crop on that there. So knowing what you have growing is probably, or what you want there the next year can be a big of an issue going forward. Keep from stressing or crowding out something that's underneath those windrows.
There's a guy that's bale grazing in our area that started 3 years ago. And he's killing sagebrush with it. It's like in a spot that was used to be farmed back in the day. They can maybe get a little water to it, but not much. He's been bale grazing on it, and it's killing all the sage out. It's pretty cool. Anyway, so it's like the same kind of theory, right? So if you're bale grazing, and let's say you have this much left over, it's gonna kill the grass out there. It's gonna do put a lot of soil organic matter there and build soil in that spot. But can you economically sustain that for 2 years? It takes about 3 years for the grass to come back. And Rick Coughlin, he rolls them out a little bit, like a third of the bale he'll roll out and then leave 2/3. So you end up like 2-3 inches of residue where that grass can come up through it. So this guy in Helmville that's bale grazing, he went back and harrowed it just to speed that process up a little bit. So you're breaking up some organic matter there, spreading out, you're gonna lose some of it that won't go down, it'll oxidize and go up. But yeah, really good production. I mean, like the manure load that you had there, fertilizing that ground, killing out the sage and then the grass that came up, it's pretty impressive. So I think that harrowing could be a good tool if you're in a spot that you can do it.
Who's that?
Gary's are doing that right now.
One more question, I guess might be geared a little bit towards Cole. You're talking about the conservation easements and then kind of a little bit more holistic type of approach with conservation. So kind of the new thing, I was just curious how much you looked into, like, and I don't know, carbon credits are just kind of interesting. And I don't know if that's something you just looked into. I'm just kind of curious on your opinion.
I guess my opinion is, I'm not any kind of expert, but what I've seen, I worked at, the last 4 years, when I haven't been doing beef stuff, I worked for a group called Western Landlings Alliance, and so we worked on farm bill stuff and ecosystem services markets and endangered species act type questions and like migration. So I think got a bit of a bath in that world, and I guess I would just say that it seems to me like there's programs out there already that are paying for, some form of, for the most part, they're paying to keep carbon where it is, rather than for some chance or increase in carbon. It seems to me like our technology isn't there. I think that there's a lot of unanswered questions about even if we get it figured out how to measure that change. How sustainable that change be? Is it a sink that kind of fills up, or is it, I think a lot of programs tend to reward, this is a challenge where if it works in an area where there's a lot of potential, but let's say there's a lot of historic degradation, it sort of rewards those properties that start with a low bar, and then you try to, and so maybe it's not as good of a tool to I wonder whether there's good of a tool to incentivize once it has been good soil management over time. Sometimes I think that the agricultural markets do a really good job if they're healthy markets at sort of rewarding stewardship, whereas trying to bottle some of these ecosystem services. I guess I have a lot of suspicion of, or just care. I guess I feel very careful about them, and I've not seen situations where it's being implemented where it looks, oh, that's robust. Like it's robust measurement. It's you can hang your hat on it. Not sure,
And don't you think that it's happening anyway? If the government will come in and take a company that's doing some polluting someplace and give them carbon credits, they can put out to you to use a carbon sink, then there's money coming towards it for some reason.
Well, like mitigation, that's a little different. Like mitigation banks make some sense to me. You're going to have some disruption, disturbance, and so investing that back in restoration, like that makes some sense to me. But just in terms of, there's no.
I'm not finding zero. So.
If you were just going to say, hey, we will allocate taxpayer dollars, like let's say like we do with crop insurance, and we're going to try to move the needle by paying for carbon. We're just not there with our measurement, and I think there's a lot of question on whether how long term that carbon. The measurements all over the place from this deep to this deep to this deep. Plenty of that carbon at the upper layers is labile. It cycles, and then the deeper stuff doesn't as much. There's a lot of the markets that are out there are voluntary markets, and so it's hard for me to have confidence that if I was trying to pencil that out as an operation, I'm going to make an investment in maybe some new soil practice, and yet this is corporations paying voluntary dollars into a pot of money that will apparently come to us. But if it's not a regulated market, that money could easily go away. It's just corporations sort of trying to make their identity look better by putting money in the market like that. Anyway, it seems like we have a lot of like big stories about it and a lot of talk, but it just seems like the actual examples we have on the ground so far, despite all our technology, are fairly partial and limited in scale, duration. It would be my least on the total poll of priorities in terms of me thinking about like what's going to make a difference for our ranch over the next 25 years. I wouldn't put my money in that one.
Yeah, I was just curious. You spoke on an influx of cash from easements as a city, the idea of possible influx of cash from carbon credits. So yeah, I can agree with you with the regulatory side as well as one group they study their testing's completely different than another test, but then they're trying to say all credits. Yeah.
It was about 10 years ago. There were people coming around and said, we want to sign you up for carbon. We don't have any money yet, but we get you signed up. So when we get this money, you'll be first in line. I'll remember. I'm still waiting.
Then they also say that the arid west has the least carbon sequestering compared to the Midwest or the East, where they've got moisture climate.
Yeah, back to the thing about just the metabolism of our landscape. I mean, if our seeding's a lot lower for changing for the delta, you know, the carbon, then maybe it's less useful here. I don't know, yeah, I don't think that just means that all ecosystem service markets are bunk. I don't mean to say that at all. Like different ways to drive revenue, land stewardship could make sense. That one, I just, hard time.
Kind of like selling Montana bottled beer.
There's a lot of guys at that soil conference, you probably heard them. They're a lot smarter than we are. They were saying very similar things as far as technology's not there, the carbon in your top, you know, layers cycling. And it's the stuff that's way down that's actually sequestering. And I just wanted to say that they repeat what they were saying about the contracts and being careful if you do pursue that of what you're locking yourself into as a producer and what they'll actually pay for that. I mean, like, that's what a lot of those guys were saying is like, Dr. Allen Williams is like, we haven't signed any, we recommend the people that we work with don't sign them. Everybody's free to make their own choices, but, I mean, I was thinking for a while, like, oh man, that'd be cool, right? Cause like different ways that you can drive revenue to ranches for good practices seems good. And they're just like, be very cautious about the contracts that are out, that you sign.
This is just, it's kind of interesting. I had a guy call me from Fort Benton yesterday, and they had a big hemp plant up there, and they're talking about all these producers they're working with on hemp, and there's talking about how much carbon these hemp roots are gonna put in the ground, but at the same time, just how much nitrogen they're putting on. And it's like, you know, we've got to be careful that the carbon thing doesn't run away from us. I mean, soil acidity because of ammonia application is an issue. And, you know, what that does to microbiology, it is an issue. And, you know, we're finding, at least in our little experiment, that it's paying some dividends to not use it. Not only the fact we don't have to buy it, but it seems that the AALMs seem to be going in a good direction. So I just think that like carbon is, you know, it's great in the sense that it holds more water and holds nutrients and all that. But if I'm not sure, like agriculture as the climate solution is, you know, agriculture as like not losing our soil, maintaining fertility, increasing fertility if we can, holding the water that we do, you know, that we do get. Those all, and decreasing our input costs, like those all make a lot of sense to me. Agriculture as climate warrior, I don't know, there's so many other good reasons to invest in soil. You have to care about it and try to improve it. It's a start just to not send all our soil down the river. I was thinking, I'm curious, and this will maybe, I know we probably gotta go, but, I think of these irrigated bottom meadows in Helmville. And one of the things that struck me so much, you know, that water runs down. His dad's like the best flood irrigator in the history of it. He's a beaver. And he worked himself to the bone doing this. But I mean, we spread out water, mostly flood. We have a couple of pivots, but mostly it's flood irrigated over the entire bottom of the valley. And it slopes down as it goes towards the Blackfoot River. But it also just means that like towards the bottom of our meadows, it gets really wet, almost too wet. And you talk about slimy. When we dug a hole in the coal masters, one of the things that was striking to me was all those roots go down and form a dense mat of just, it's almost mossy. I mean, it's just dense, and those roots are not going a long ways down. It's black soil, but it's really clay heavy. And, you know, Brent would say to us kids, well, if I don't irrigate that, he knows where every high spot is that doesn't get water, and he tries his damnedest to get water on it. And if you don't get water on it, it doesn't produce near as much. But it's almost this question of, you know, has flood irrigating as much as we have, especially towards the bottom where the water starts to sit, has it trained those roots to only have to go down so far? And how do you break that addiction? If it is an addiction, how do you break it? Could something like hemp help us get deeper and act, you know, even just, you know, as a temporary thing? I think I guess if there was one thing I'm really curious about, I'm curious, would less water given some really strong roots to get deep and break through that low, really thick layer, would we be able to make water go further? I think it's really interesting. And those are the kind of things that I think are just exciting. It's like, there are things to be learned, it seems like.
Where's the water table there?
It's high. I mean, I don't know how high, but it's really close to the surface, especially given that we're just running the water down the valley all summer long.
I found at my place, because we used to fly irrigate ours a lot. And we've gone to sprinkler and drip irrigation. And now we spread the water out over a larger area, but we don't have that fly irrigation recharging those low
Yeah.
areas. And what's happened over the past 10 years is that grass is gradually transitioned from the sedges to that stuff that's just so you know that part has gone more towards the other grasses, more towards the native grasses. And your ground has gone from swampy to you can drive on it now. So it's just taken time, but that's what we found on our stuff. And it's actually improved the grazing for cows. Because they go down there in wintertime and eat that stuff. It's that black soil actually has value because those plants are now starting to go down and get those nutrients out of it.
Then the other side that I'm dealing with on some property I have is that it's the low end, and so above us, everybody has subdivided. And what used to be sub-irrigated and flood irrigated always made its way down. And we've lost probably over half our production because of what's gone on above us with the subdivisions and the wells and everything that's gone into it. And the ground is hard as a brick. And we're trying to figure out, without putting a lot of inputs into it and breaking it up and totally reseeding it, what can we do? In the middle of a drought year last year, and we had one run over with the irrigation water, and then we ran out. So we're dealing with not having the water, and so 60 acres that didn't produce enough to graze for 30 days. And so we're trying to find the same thing of how do you break up that clay layer and get something in there that is productive and will break up the clay layer and help to build the soil health back and without water.
This
Yeah,
question to me is like one of the more interesting questions because there's not really necessarily right or wrong answer depending on where you're at. Right?
Yeah.
And I've asked a lot of people because it's like, there's some springs down in our bottom grounds, right? It's like, well, this ground has been done this way for so long. Is that spring because of all the flood irrigation, or is it because that was there and it's just like runs that heavy from that? It's like, okay, so if I stick a pivot right here, I can control water, but then do I dry myself up and my neighbors all the way down this bottom ground? Like, where's the value? What's the effects? I don't think we really know until you do it, and then you're like, oh shit, But that question is, I don't know if you can answer it, but it affects, fish, rafters,
Oh, yeah.
grazing animals, it affects like everything. It's such a big question that's really hard to answer, but also really, like, to me, it's important, right? Because we pivots are pushed really hard as water saving, but also that recharge from like a lot of the springs and that flood irrigation, that has value, but it's really hard to put like a number on it and tell.
Depends on where the pivot's pulling. it.
Exactly, right? So if you're on a little bit of a bench ground, instead of like moving this water like way over and then, flooding it, to me, those are good areas. It's like, that's way more efficient with the pivot, right? And these bottom grounds that you can imagine beavers back in the day, like building up the water table and building some of that resiliency. Maybe that makes sense for flood, but when you talk to 10 people, you're gonna get 10 different answers, but it's a fun conversation because it affects everybody. And what you do, especially because we're pretty close to the reservoir and, fairly far upstream into the drainage, there's so many people below us, just in our little valley, that it would affect, much less return flows into Nevada Creek, into Blackfoot, into so on and so on, right? So it's like, it's a very large scale question that right there.
And
Fuck
there's
that
always
state.
somebody willing to sell you something that'll solve your problem.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
Impacts due to different land usage too. One thing we're finding out in this part of the state, we're losing water at an extraordinary rate. It has to do with a lot of the guys that, you know, the rich guys coming in and buying their happy ranch and digging their fish pond and digging their duck pond. There's so many of those ponds that exist now on the Madison and the Ruby, that it's an exponential amount of water losing to evaporation. And then they're using groundwater, aquifer water to recharge their fish pond out in front of their mansion. So that's an impact on a lot of agricultural producers for something that's based entirely in decades.
And the Bitterroot's gravel pits. They take it down to the water table and we have acres and acres and acres of open water. They're all gravel pits. And they're just.
A good example is, Marty. All the ranches put in pivots. They used to be all flood irrigation out of that spring creek. They put in pivots. And there's a big spring creek that runs along, and then there's the Madison River. And on the other side was always a bunch of big cottonwood trees. They put those pivots in there and all those cottonwood trees have died. Even the water from that bench was going down and coming up on the other side of the river.
They've stopped the water from running down the neck of its way.
I mean, it's what's really cool about agriculture, and what's extremely frustrating at the same time, right? Every yin has a yang over here, and figuring out the time and place for this yin or that yang is like extremely frustrating, but it's also really cool when you like the impact that you can have. It's large, right? It's not just you, and it's your whole neighbor in your community. You know, that like the whole soil health, the water conservation, it's a big deal. And it's only, I mean, everybody here knows that water is going to be bigger and bigger every year. Like, comes back to soil and all these things. Frustrating, but it's cool.
We have a final question for these guys. You guys gotta get home at some point.
Kalina, I think I interrupted you at one point.
No, I was just thinking about the question about that one tool. And so you guys talked a lot about diversity, talked a lot about different tools, and also just paying attention, right? So like you're talking about irrigation and, okay, now I'm sticking with COVID all the time. Now I'm noticing this. And so those tools, like more tools, and also what's going on every year. We're gonna have another year of drought. We're gonna have 3 years. Right? So like that adaptability, that listening, and increasing your tool belt, so then you are educated about the tools and know what applies to your property and your area. I mean, when we talk about soil health and list all the different things that could possibly be related to improving soil health, I mean, there's a lot less. There's gonna be a subset of that, what you guys are doing at this point in time, and that might change.
For sure.
What you said about increasing just observation, and learning to be more observant all the time. That's why we gotta not have, agriculture bleed people, because those are the observers, and we need more of that talent. Back in the industry.
Corporate knowledge.
Yeah, just, can lose it really fast, but it's hard to build. But I agree with, I mean, that observation thing is critical on that. We can't know exactly, every little place you go, every field is a little bit different. And so it's like investing in our ability to observe and resiliency.
And learning how to flood irrigate properly.
There's a lot of ifs and buts to that too, depending on your soil types.
I mean, so this year will be kind of fun. We're gonna have we're working with a partner with the Blackfoot Challenge and NRCS. We're putting in some soil moistures, like the fancy ones, go straight to your computer readings. And we're doing one under the pivot, and then we're doing 2 in flood. The one flood is like a pretty steep grade. The other one is a place that grandpa leveled back in the day, so it's like pretty shallow gravelly now. But water gets across it really easy. So it's like kind of these 3 different scenarios that we're gonna try to monitor and see, most efficient use for your water. How long did you have to leave it there till it actually soaked down in? Like in that really gravelly one, should you come back 10 days sooner and the really clayey one, did you come back too soon? That the monitoring through whatever experiment that you choose to do is important, and it's something that we haven't necessarily been great at. It's really hard to find the time to do, and typically pretty expensive to outsource. So observation kind of is what's there, but if you can't afford to have a third party come in and do that, extremely valuable.
Don't get rid of your grounds probe.
No, yeah.
Hang on to it.
Yeah.
We had, it's called Agromet. There's a group of businesses that threw them together, and they were coming out and they were measuring the moisture. And they dug put little round plastic tubes in the ground, and in every foot there was a little open spot, and they could take their little meter and they could run it down and test the moisture at different levels, and then they would have a rain gauge up and they could measure how much rain you had, and they would formulate a plan as to what type of irrigation system you had and when to irrigate again. Well, they found out that the one that they used to run down the tubes, they were having a lot of problems with it, and so then he went to the back of his pickup and pulled out the grounds probe, stuck it down on the ground and felt the ball and on the end of the probe and said, well, this is what we recommend now. And that happened quite a bit, where they had problems. And then we had a neighbor that was up on technology, was really into computers from his house. And they had that from the probe in the ground, and it went into his computer. And he was telling the fellow that was renting the ground when they should be irrigating. And he was telling another neighbor, he said, we saved a lot of water by using that new sensor. And so another neighbor went over and looked at the crop. He said, did you see that across the fence from me? And I says, no, I haven't been down there. He says, go look. And so I went down. I didn't even go across the fence. It was a disaster. He said, but the guy that was using the system says, oh yeah, we said we saved one irrigation worth of water, but I'll tell you what, they got half crop out of it instead. So keep the grounds probe, and we monitor and look, but hang on to the grounds probe and use it along with the new technology, because at that time it wasn't perfected.
Yeah, it's hard to beat observation, honestly.
I don't know if you guys know Peter Donovan. Has anybody run across him? Thing called the Soil Carbon Challenge. Anybody heard of him? He's a brilliant. He's been all over Montana. He's been all over the West. Back in 2011, he was a scientist who got interested in carbon as a climate mitigation strategy, and he got a bus, outfitted it to live in, and he spent from then until now driving around the country measuring, setting up sites, and developed a software called Soil App. It's soilhealth.app.com. Go there. It's sort of a citizen science way for ranchers to record their observations over time. And I just read he's kind of closing the soil carbon challenge down. I read his post about it, and he said basically he got more passionate about it over time, and yet the only measurable changes in carbon that he thought he could have any confidence in, it seemed like an outlier, and it was Neil Dennis up in Saskatchewan. But by and large, he just could not say that over those 12 years, there has been an appreciable difference, either improvement or negative, in the soil carbon on these sites that he'd helped to set up, which kind of sounds like a not very hopeful thing. But what he was saying was that this soilhealth.app thing, it increased people's observation, it engaged them in the process. And their soil health doesn't mean their soil health wasn't improving. Soil carbon wasn't changing, if you could tell, but it's the kind of thing where we were just having a discussion the other day about using that same app to start tracking where elk are in different parts of the season. It was a brucellosis discussion, and basically building in rancher knowledge so that data is more available when the agencies are making the decisions. And it's like, once you just increase that observation factor and our ability to track and see trends over time, that can only help. Anyway, I thought that was kind of the tie-in between this carbon thing and then the broader question of soil health and increasing our observation.
Thanks, gentlemen. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
I'm gonna leave this slide if you are caught up.
You probably will get one of those postcards in the mail as well. I think 7 out of 5 hours. Thanks.
Take somebody.
Yeah, I figured this. Back in town, I just got back in town.
Yeah.
Be nasty.
Driving all over down here. What is your next? So with this weather, I got.
Like today I'll be
At
sending
least what
out.
I'm working on, it's gonna work together.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having us.
You might know my brother Rob.
And then.
Yeah, he goes like that. Yeah,